Hi, and welcome to the Diablo podcast brought to you by PureDiablo.com, your home for an ever expansive wiki, a growing community, and this podcast. I am your host, Xanth, and I am here today with Muggle Mama, Nineball,
Hi.
Oh, hi.
and well, you've got three names, but let's go with your
Fun.
Diablo one first. Nevalistis, aka Brandy. Brandy, welcome.
Man, great to be here. I feel like I'm stretching some old muscles.
And I'm sure there are plenty within the Diablo community who are just happy to hear your voice and see your face. Nothing against Pez. He's doing a great job. But for a long stretch of time,
Mhm.
you were the face and voice of Diablo.
Yeah.
Um, so let's start there. What is your
Okay.
history? What brought you to Blizzard? And how'd you end up in the role that you did?
Oh gosh. So it's kind of a weird two-part roundabout story because I didn't start at Blizzard on Diablo, and I didn't even start it as a community manager. I started in support in 2009, about 1 week after BlizzCon 2009. um, which was kind of a surreal experience. But honestly, I like to say that I kind of weaseled my way in, to be honest, because when I first got started doing things at Blizzard, it was because I was super hyperactive in the WoW community. At the time, that was basically the transition between Burning Crusade um, to Wrath of the Lich King. It was like the tail end of Burning Crusade, and that was when I was like the most active I've ever really been in an MMO. I did a lot of writing around that time. I did a lot of guides. Paladin tanks were relatively new to the meta of the world, and I was very into it. So I was involved in a lot of those conversations, and I got to know a lot of the CMs because of how active I was in the WoW community. So I got to know Anix really well because he was hanging around in the Paladin forums a lot. I got to know Zarum because I liked harassing him online all the time. And I got to know Nethera because she's just a delightful human being. And it turns out that she's the CM for one of the very first MMOs I had ever played in my life, which was Shadowbane. So for me, it was just kind of one of these like I didn't even realize that this thing I had kind of already been doing as a fan, like writing blogs and interacting with people and kind of self-moderating in my own communities and things like that. That's a job, y'all. Like there's things you can do there that's actually now. And so I was like, okay, well then maybe this is a path that I can pursue. And had gone to BlizzCon. I got a chance to talk to the first BlizzCon I went to was in 2008, and that's where I met John and Danielle, so Zarum and Nethera. And it was great to get to know the both of them. I very clearly made an impression because we started just chatting regularly and began to keep in touch. And then John was actually the one who had reached out to me and said, "Hey, there's a wave of CS positions opening up. Do you want to apply?" Like, sure, that's a way to get my foot in the door, and that was just kind of how I got started. So I started in 2009. I started as a GM, just answering tickets, helping people with their lost loot, and telling them to get lost when they lied to us and wanted things done that they shouldn't have done, and, and all the good things that GMs do. um, and then a position opened up on what was called the CS Forum team, which was basically being a game master, but on forums instead of taking tickets. And that ended up kind of being my way into community management because that's kind of where I got to cut my teeth on community management. I got to understand how the forums worked, how blogging worked, how publishing worked, and just kind of baby steps into the way that CMs interacted with the community at the time. Um, and 2012 rolled around and layoffs happened, and I was actually part of the layoffs in 2012. So I left Blizzard involuntarily, and ended up landing at a small studio. It was a Korean publisher that happened to be nearby because one of the folks that I had met in CS, she had moved over there. She was starting up a team, and she was like, "We need a community team. there's never been a community team here. I know this is something you're interested in. I've worked with you before, and I think this is something you could get going in a small environment like this. Do you want to come and do this for me? And that was the first time that I was a community manager, and I was a CM for 5 different games that were all different genres at the same time.
So it was like super easy. Yep, exactly.
Oh yeah, cakewalk. 2 of them were S's, but very different FPSs. One was like an anime golf game, one was an anime MMO, and then the other one was a side-scrolling action brawler with heavy focus on PvP. Like, all very different and wild and weird, but fun in their own right. Kind of, I got to know that community, and then as is wont to happen in the games industry, I got laid off again. So they moved their unit up to Canada and said, "Do you want to move to Canada?" And I said no. So took a severance package. And bounced around for a little while, did some writing on my own, did some self-editing, and then 2 positions opened up at Blizzard, and I applied for both. And one was as a CM on WoW, and one was as a CM on Diablo. And that's where I ended up coming back to, because at that point, it was like the whole Diablo team knew who I was. A lot of the people who were handling Diablo at the time were also WoW community managers. I already knew Micah, I already knew John, I already knew Danielle, and they were all kind of flexing their muscles for D3. And I came in, what was it? The day that Diablo launched on consoles, that D3 launched on consoles, which was like September 3rd, 2013, I think. So, which I only remember because my birthday's September 4th. So it was one of the best birthday gifts ever, was starting on the Diablo teams.
So you had to start on a
now
launch
you're employed.
Employment is a gift, right? I mean, that's totally fine. So you started on the launch date too, which is as a CM that has to be very tough. I mean, there was Diablo 3 in general had a very notorious launch.
Mm-hmm.
So to start with a launch has to be difficult.
Yeah, thankfully console was not nearly as trepidatious as D3's original launch was. Honestly, everything went really smoothly that day. There was very little that I had to do. I was afforded the ability to onboard pretty well. I was up and writing blogs like a week later, but so like it wasn't a very long onboarding process, but yeah, it was pretty easy to hop right back into things. And a lot of the questions that I got early on was just like, well, what do you want your forum name to be? What do you want this to be? And Nevalistis was the forum name I had used on the CS team, and I was like, can I keep that one? Because like, kind of already built a community here. I'd love to just carry those connections forward. And that was something that they had never let anybody do before, was carry a name forward from one department to another. So I was one of the first to keep my name cross department at Blizzard. So that was kind of interesting and momentous. But yeah, I mean, launch was real interesting. We then like the week prior to it launching on consoles was when Reaper of Souls was announced. So I had already just kind of come in and been told, hey, we're working on an expansion, like time to start learning stuff. And that's kind of what the experience was getting on there and understanding, all right, what does this expansion look like? What does it mean? What are the things that have been shared? What are the things that haven't been shared? And what's really going to be my part in it? And a lot of that changed over time. Like I had a really great team starting there. I'm sure Whitney, you remember Marcus, and and Kimba, of course, is an art director over on Diablo, which is where she should be. But she was on the Diablo community team when I started, and Stephanie was our lead. And then we had Matt, who was very often not seen because he was our producer, basically. So he was our project manager, and he's the one who kept us all on task. So you didn't necessarily see much of him on the forums. He had a username and everything, but like that was everybody's sick and someone needs to go push the blog button. You go do this now. And yeah, that was kind of our initial little starting team. They all taught me a boatload, but community was even just very different from the start of when I began at Blizzard to when I left. It was a completely different beast. So it's kind of one of the interesting things about community management in general. I think I've said this in every conversation I've ever had about community management. There's no standardization in the industry for what a CM is. Like I you tell somebody in the industry, "Oh, I'm a community manager," and they're like, "Oh, you post on the forums and do social media stuff, right?" It's like, I'm yes, but there's just a lot more than that.
You mean there's more than just
Oftentimes,
shit posting on Reddit?
I know, right? I mean,
Yeah.
depends on
No.
the day of the week, but
That's a
yeah,
that's a good transition into like what exactly a CM does, and obviously said like there isn't a universal standard for it, but like
mhm.
what are all of the things that fall under the umbrella that you have done or you have seen done that go under the role of a CM?
Or I
Ah,
guess,
gosh.
or maybe a more interesting question is kind of like how did it start and how did it end? Since you mentioned, that it changed wildly over time. Just to
It
kind of give an
did.
idea of like how things evolved in your tenure there, because you were there, on the community team for quite some time.
About 6.5 years is how long I was
Mhm.
on the Diablo community team. And for me, I mean, initially, I kind of started off mostly being the listener, right? Like, I was the person who would go read through on the forums, collect feedback, listen to what players had to say, and then kind of ferry advice or ferry information back and forth between development, players, support, and development. Um, Honestly, that's a pretty great way to summarize. If there was a standardization in the industry, I think the one thing they all have in common is that community managers are really liaisons between the public and between the private entity. So they are your translators between dev speak to player speak and player speak to dev speak. Like that is the
Mhm.
thing that a CM absolutely needs to be able to do to succeed in that role. Um, and so I was much more focused on kind of the hands-on stuff early on, and then I really started expressing my interest in like, "Hey, I wanna write." I really like writing, my background's in writing, I have a screenwriting degree, like, I'd love to put that to use. How can I do this? And it started out with just, like, little blogs, like, I think the first blog I ever wrote was about T-shirts you could buy on the Xbox store for console that were Diablo branded, and it was just, like, I mean, the dumbest little article, something that's necessary, but, like, here's your first piece. This is the first
Yeah.
thing you ever published at Blizzard. I'm like, cool. T-shirts for a system that doesn't even exist anymore. Like, um, and I just kind of kept pushing on. That was my main interest. Like, please let me write more. Like, I would love to do things that prepare people for patches. I would love to start up community blogs. I ran Player Way Thursday for ages and ages and ages, which was a boatload of a ridiculous amount of work and probably way more work than it was worth. But people really liked it. It got good numbers. It got really good engagement. People were reading it every week. It was getting people to come back and play the game.
It pulled
Um,
people from the community in as well, giving them spotlights.
Yep. Yeah, and that was always the goal with it was like let's make this isn't needs to not be about me. It needs to be about the community. I want to give the community a platform to talk and show the cool things that they're doing in game and be creative. And honestly, my main impetus behind even that piece was just like let's show that you don't just have to like go to Icy Veins to get your build and that's the only way you play the game. Like you can play the game with whatever you get and honestly, that's how most people do, especially on console. Like people aren't going and looking up exactly what their build should be on console. They're just using whatever drops in front of them and continuing onwards. Um,
And
so yeah,
tangentially, but the people that are playing on console right now will tell you that the things that work on PC do not work on console for the
exactly.
most
Like I
part right now. Yeah.
fundamentally different systems as well. Like and even that kind of like changed and migrated over time. Um, So yeah, it kind of started out like that, and as I kept getting these opportunities to write more, I think people started realizing they're like, "Oh, hey, this girl can actually write." So I started getting more opportunities to do more creative things, like when I started getting to do videos for the Diablo channel. And I think anybody who, part of the reason that you guys all say like, oh, you were the voice and the face of Diablo for so long was because I had that outlet. I was in every video, or I wrote every video, or I produced every video, or I was
All of the above.
one of those three things was true for like 4 years straight. So and it was just because I had the experience, you know. I say I have a screenwriting degree. My degree is in digital cinema, so I know how to edit. I know how to cut things together. I knew my way around audio and video, and so it was something that, you know, I had the interest in. Josh Allen, who by the way was the person who got the WoW one I applied for at the same time, so we started like within a month or two of each other, and both had very similar interests. So like we ended up working together a lot behind the scenes because we had the same needs. It was like, well, I want to do live streams for Diablo. And he's like, I want to do live streams for WoW. Let's go yell at people till they give us both a budget. So, and that was really helpful too, because it was like, well, your budget's larger than mine. You're on WoW. So my budget's not quite as big as yours is, but if I just throw my hat in your ring, I'm happy to help you fight those battles. And so there are those kinds of like company level things that you have to do as well, just to get the resources that you need to provide the community with content that's fun and engaging and informative, and all of those different things. And honestly, by the end of it, I was kind of acting like I mean, I was kind of acting like the CM lead in a lot of ways, because I was dictating a lot of our content plans going forward, where it was like, here's the structure for what a patch looks like. You do patch notes at this point. You do a PTR release at this point. You do the PTR update at this point. You do, like, you know, I had it all down to kind of a science and an art and a structure. All of stuff that I just kind of like, oh, here you go. Here's the whole package on my way out. Like this is how to Diablo 3 patch. It's all pretty much there. So and it was just very cyclical by that time, and that's the nature of being on a game that's in a late life cycle like Diablo 3 is. You know, it hits a cadence and a rhythm at some point where it's just like, yep, this is just how these things go. So but yeah, there's just lots of little things too that I think just kind of go by the wayside. It really is everything: social media to forums to feedback to meeting with the designers and getting questions asked and answered to creating content, keeping the community engaged. And then at this point in time, and I mean really by the time I left Blizzard, and I think what is becoming more common in the industry overall, is that you don't really have a community manager doing all of those things anymore. Ideally, that's still true at smaller companies, and it's still true at a lot of companies where it shouldn't be true. But now it's kind of being broken down into a social media manager who really focuses on content on social media, and it focuses on a community manager who's much more focused on cultivating and maintaining a community, making sure it stays as positive and engaging as possible, and getting people to come back and play. It's really more about player engagement when you're a CM at this point. And to influencer managers, which are the folk who do all the outreach with podcasts like you guys, or streamers, or you know, different kinds of media sites and things like that, and where it starts kind of bridging that gap to PR a little bit in that way. And so it's kind of starting to piecemeal out a little bit. You're even starting to see differentiations between like community managers and content managers, where a content manager is going to be much more production focused in terms of, well, here's the blogs or videos or other kinds of content that's going to be produced, and that has its whole timeline, to folks who are a lot more into that one-on-one engagement with the community. So it differs and it changes, and I feel like it changes every year as quickly as social media platforms change. So and that's kind of the nature of that beast, I think.
It's really interesting, you know, being on the other side of, you know, this, you know, kind of exchange. You know, having, you know, been work with you, you know, as a content creator in the past and such, and then seeing kind of how it's continued to progress, you know, just from what you're going through and mentioning, where it is something that, I guess, I don't know whether it's just because the people are seeing more value in that and breaking up that role, you know, and allowing it to flourish, because it almost feels as if allowing people to have that ability to more narrow focus in on those goals, that it seems to give more, credence to allowing it. Having someone that's specifically intended for, like the influencers, content creators, and such, and how that can pay dividends. That they're always available for a question or something like that, or trying to piece together the next big, social media campaign or something. Versus, well, I can't do anything, for the next 2 weeks because we're about to push a PTR.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think it's actually a really great sign of the maturity of a game company, as to whether or not their CMs are handling 1 or 17 things. Because they're treating something that, like, I think we're past the point where people are like, oh, a community manager, we don't need that. It's very clear you need a community manager. I think for a lot of especially younger companies or companies who just really haven't invested in it, they're looking at it going, well, we know we need one, but we're not sure for what or why. Like, I don't know what value we want to get at role. And I think that's slowly changing over time, which is an awesome thing. And I love seeing that kind of growth. Like, I might not be a community manager anymore, but I still love seeing it progress and grow. And I'm still in a whole bunch of like conversation channels with other community managers and offering the advice that I can give to maybe people who are starting out in it. And it's something that I so key to having, a healthy community versus a toxic community is really a sign of how much the company puts into it and how good their community managers are.
I think a nice interjection there is that you talk about a toxic community, right?
Mm-hmm.
Diablo's not easy. Like, it's not an easy community. It
Mm-hmm.
wasn't easy years ago. It's not easy today, although I would argue it seems like time has worn some of the edges. But um, you jumped in at, I mean, it was still we had a new expansion coming, right? And that's
Yeah.
exciting, but there's still a lot of vitriol in the Diablo community.
Mm-hmm.
How do you handle that? Like, how do you I mean, obviously you're a very
So
positive person, but like that's tough.
I I do think it's really interesting that you say that I jumped in at a very exciting time, because not like 2 weeks earlier was when the auction house was announced as being closed down. So like that was the point in time where I was entering the Diablo community, was around like the peak conversation of what the auction house was, why it was bad for the community, why we needed to get, like, all of that conversation was, I didn't touch any of it. I just kind of like sat back and was like, wow, I'm glad I wasn't here like 2 months ago to be the one handling this right now. So I kind of got to watch the others handle that firefight, and they honestly, I think they did a wonderful job. Um, but I also think it's a matter of, I think back that while I was at Blizzard, I had community managers coming to me and going, "Why are your YouTube comments so pleasant?" And it was just like, to me, I had a really hard time answering that question. And so I have a working theory. I have a working theory that, you say that there is quite a bit of toxicity and vitriol, and I think that's true in every community. How much it really poisons the heart of the community is really what a community manager's job is. Because I don't think it's a community manager's job to make a community purified of that toxicity. I think that's literally impossible. I don't think in the environment of the world that we're in right now, with the way that social media functions and works, that isn't a realistic goal. But fighting against it and empowering people to be positive and to be constructive and to continue to make their own community better, because that is what they want for it, that is an achievable goal. And that has always been my goal in any of the communities that I worked in, was give your players the power to have ownership over your community and say, this is mine. And the things that will be welcome here are the things that are good for us, not the things that are going to hurt us. And so that's always kind of been my philosophy. I can't say that there was ever like dealing with toxicity does come with building a thick skin. There are some parts of it that are just ugly and nasty, and it's going to get surfaced to you. And at the end of the day, the thing you have to tell yourself are two things. One, the vitriol is not actually aimed at you. It's aimed at whatever it is you're working on. And that is not you. You have to have a level of separation with the thing that you're supporting, and you can't take it personally. And then the second part of that is, what's the best way to word this? I had it in my mind and then it just out the side. But that part's really important. And then the other part is just making sure I've totally lost my train of thought. Damn, I had it.
We can edit it out. It'll be fine. And then we'll,
I had
star wipe, and then you have it.
and then maybe I mean maybe it'll come back to me later too. But fighting that toxicity really is just a matter of not taking it personally is the biggest part of it. That's the other part. The other part is that remembering at the end of the day, you work in games and nobody's going to die because of this. Like, and the person who told me this, by the way, is my husband. He's like, Ashton is the one who's just like, remember, you might be going home and feeling awful and taking it to heart and taking it personally. It's fine. Take a day off. No one's going to die because you didn't post patch notes tomorrow. They're going to be upset, but no one's going to die. You're not working in an ER. You're not working in a place where life and death is literally on the line. It's still a game. And that sobering reminder is something that you do have to kind of remind yourself, because games are passionate. They're fueled on passion. They're fueled by passionate devs and they're fueled by passionate players. And that is a recipe for high level emotion at all points and times. And that's where that toxicity comes from, but it's really more about just like, I just love this thing so much, I want the best for it. And that sentiment comes on both sides of the field. It's when you let it take you too far that it becomes a problem, and you need to get grounded again. I remember having that conversation with a few folks on the forums behind the scene where I'm like, hey, I'm gonna send you an email, like, we're gonna have a talk now, because like no one's gonna die because barbarians didn't get a buff. So like, chill out.
You've been gone, what, 2 years now?
Yeah, about that. I left in February of 2020, I believe was my last day.
Okay. I remember at BlizzCon 19, you and I had a conversation.
Yeah.
And we had talked about, you getting Wolf up and doing D4 first. And it was like, you could tell you had this passion for trying to get the smaller people up there, because you had your big boys, right?
Right.
They pulled in all the numbers and those people are important, but then you had these little people who just love the game. And I remember you were like, next time I'm gonna try and get you up there, and it was like you touched my heart so much, and then you left.
I'm so sorry.
I was so sad, but I have to say, like, after you left and they brought in the new team, one of them actually told me, and I don't know if I told you this or not, but they were like, she left amazing notes. Like, what she had started was incredible. And so I know things have like evolved from what you had. Is it bittersweet? How do you deal with the fact that it's grown to something that I can only imagine you dreamed about? Like,
so, I'm gonna try not to cry. Oh my goodness.
I'm sorry.
It's not, by the way, it's not a podcast until I've cried on it, as far as I'm concerned. I think that's true. I think every podcast I've ever been on, I've cried at some point in time. But so that was a personal like goal of mine, and it's actually something I did at Wizards too before I left. Is to leave as good of notes as possible behind. I hate people who leave and leave nothing behind. That is a gigantic pet peeve of mine, because it's like, cool, that's how much you cared about this place. You're done. And you know what? Sometimes that's warranted. Sometimes you had a real bad time and you just want to wipe your hands and be done, and that's totally fine. But for me, I was leaving for me, and I wanted to make sure that what I left behind was meaningful and laid the groundwork that, whoever came in behind me, especially because I knew I was leaving at a point in time where there wasn't another team member to fill in my shoes. I was the last CM who was there at the time. They were in the process of doing a hiring process. The last person I interviewed before I left, by the way, was Pez Radar. So I left my notes there too. It's just like, should hire this guy. He knows what he's talking about, and I'd love to work with him. But I left for me for a different opportunity. And I wanted to make sure that what I left behind was in the best interests of the community. And I do remember like the biggest thing that I like harped on, like the support team who was above me, my leadership and stuff, was this influencer list. Don't touch this. Like I put a lot of time and effort into this. And the number one thing that I never cared about as a CM was numbers. I don't care what your numbers are for the most part. I care what you put into the community. And so that was always my impetus and behind who, if there was somebody with big numbers that we were putting money behind and hiring to do things and things like that, it was because they were heavily vetted as being a good human being. And that was the most important thing to me, is that our community was represented by the best of the best. And if you had a huge amount of numbers, but you were toxic to your audience, I never wanted to work with you, because that is telling your audience that that is an okay way to treat the rest of your community. And that was the message I really wanted to leave behind. So it sounds like that was kept, and that makes me really happy.
I mean, somehow I still get invited to things, so obviously that checklist is still intact, because I don't know how that
we don't
happens.
know how you haven't been kicked out yet.
I know, right?
You're just very persuasive. I've just been in your pocket for years.
Cheers to that. Yeah. Though in actuality, it is one of those ones where it's like, well, we're on this topic of conversation. I probably wouldn't be sitting in this chair right now having this conversation if it wasn't for you. I mean, it isn't my first time telling you this, but yeah, I mean, because it's what was it? It was that year that you had gotten hired, where it was the BlizzCon that they announced Reaper of Souls in, that I met you. That we got to go through, and you were excited to go through and introduce me to dang, he used to be the world designer, and now his name eludes me.
Oh. I'm the absolute worst with names. So
you gave me a mental block, Whitney.
But yeah, no, it was nice going through, having those interactions and everything.
Was it Leonard?
So Leonard I ended up meeting later on after that, but it wasn't Leonard.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. This is gonna drive me nuts now.
Yeah. I'll have to look it up, but yeah, I don't remember it. But it was just one of those ones where I was just walking by, because it was I think it was like the Diablo. They had the little section where you got to like interact with the developers and such. And I was very very small. Like I had been a guest on this podcast, when it was under Flux. But I was just writing for BlizzPro at the time, going through and covering the Reaper of Souls announcement and everything like that. And it was just went through, stopped by, and you're like, oh yeah, you're the guy that likes lore. And so you went to like go through and usher me over, because you had one of the guys from the creative team over there to go through and discuss.
Well, and it was like, I'm like, oh, he's like a rare coin in this fountain here. Like this is like the one Diablo fan who actually really likes lore. Let's get him over to the world, people.
Because the cutscenes.
I know what most of you do.
Yep.
And play with game sounds on.
How dare
My
you?
husband doesn't
How
either.
dare
It
you?
drives me crazy.
Especially when it comes to Diablo. Like, I mean, it's like the one game that you have to give it a pass. It's like it's got coming off of Diablo 2. It's like just phenomenal music.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you have phenomenal music, and then legitimately, you will miss Treasure Goblins if you don't have your sound on. You will.
Yeah.
I've missed a lot.
I was teaching that to my son when we were playing on console. It's like we have the sound up. I'm like, wait, I can hear one. He's like, what are you talking about? I'm like, no, don't just stop talking for a second. Just listen. And he's like, you're right. I'm like, yeah, that I know I'm right. Now let's go find it.
Mm-hmm.
Rainbow farming, it's the only time I turn it on.
Mm-hmm. I'm still missing some menagerist pets, so I need to have that on until that gets fixed. So.
Oh God, I'm only missing I think I'm missing 2 menagerist pets. But I'm looking. One of my personal projects is potentially getting 100% of the achievements in Diablo 3 before Diablo launches. I have 5,000 bounties to do.
Ooh, have fun.
Yeah,
Good for you.
that's the only one that I really have to work on. That I can't just like sit and finish up in like an hour or two. Like uniques on hardcore. Yeah, I'm missing like one. You know, it's like I just had to boot up the hardcore character again. Yes, Xanth, I'll play hardcore again. And then
I
yeah, but
don't
it's no,
believe
it's
it.
it's
Hey,
yeah,
I'll help you with hardcore.
yeah.
You know you got
I
me helping you.
I believe I have to on average do 27 bounties a day between now and launch. Launch of
Whoa.
which thankfully that's like one round of bounties is 25. So in public games
Right.
it's actually quite fast.
Mm-hmm.
Not too bad. And then the developer's name was Kevin Martins. I had to look it up.
Kevin Martins, yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mystery
He's up at
solved.
Bungie now.
Really?
Yeah.
So, as we're kind of getting into, obviously the your favorite parts, meeting Muggle and Nineball. Those are the apex. We'll take it down just a slight notch. Like what are some of the other favorite things? You talked about the program that you kind of have built and the legacy that you've
Mhm.
left. Like what are those highlights? What are the big things that really like when you look back and remember Blizzard that stick out?
There's a handful of projects that are very special and like near and dear to my heart in general. The Necro Gauntlet that I'd slaved over for like 2 weeks is one of the big ones. That was literally me at my desk, like browsing forums and then working with clay and sewing at the same time at my desk, for 2 weeks straight in order to get this thing done. And like full disclosure, I didn't have a plan for it. I just knew I wanted to make it and do things with it. So it was just like, all right, now we're just going to figure out what kind of dumb things we can do with this gauntlet from now until the Necromancer comes out. Because I'm not building a whole outfit. The gauntlet's it. um and that was a lot of fun. Sadly, I don't have it anymore. The clay that I made it out of degraded over time, so I there wasn't a way for me to preserve it meaningfully, so I ended up having to toss it. But I have lots of pictures and memories of that. That one was really important to me. The coins, the Diablo coins for the anniversary was another project I was really proud of. um I'm
I
sure you have like a handful of them because I know I like just like stuffed people's pockets with them.
we actually, so Stephen and I actually, all the extra ones that we had gotten, we had given away on the West March
good.
workshop to people that hadn't had a chance in order to go through and get to BlizzCon. But I don't have my wallet in this room, but I do actually keep it in my wallet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think when I was unpacking when we first moved up here, I found like a box that had like a bundle of them. So I'm like, I'm gonna need to find something to do with this at some point in time. I'm like, I didn't even know these were here. The things you find. That was a really cool project just because I think it was the first time I really worked closely with an art director, and that one was with John Mueller. And that was at a point in time where, like, I mean, I guess I can say this now, like, at that point in time, they were laying the groundworks for D4. They were starting to do all of the very, very, very initial, like, vertical slice work, which is pre-alpha in terms of proving this is what this game's going to look like. And so it was just like, I'm like, hey, can I have a smidgen of your time to make...
Yeah, because John Mueller was basically hired on as the like unannounced Diablo project.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was the first thing that I kind of got to work with him on, and it turned out amazing. And people still eBay those things for like $45, and I'm like, they're not worth that much, but okay, it made me feel good about myself. That's not what we paid for them, but okay. That one was really cool. I loved being able to make things that the community got to take with them or got to participate in. So that's part of why that one was so neat to me, was that, like, it was like our secret club coin. You were this marked that you were at that BlizzCon or that you were a special part of it, and they were great to take to conventions afterwards. Like I think there were a handful of PAXs that I went to where I just keep a bunch in my bag and hand them out to people who came up to me and said, like, hey, I really love Diablo, and I'm like, cool, here, have a coin. And it just that moment of like, I appreciate you walking out of crowd to say hi to me. Yeah, have a cool thing. Like that kind of exchange is just, it's hard to quantify how special that is.
It becomes a tangible piece of passion is really what it
Yeah.
is.
Yeah, so that was cool. I did a small series of live streams for a while called Tavern Talk, which was one of the things that the community had just been asking for a long time. Was like, well, we want to hear directly from the devs more often. And so the hard part with that is that, at least at Blizzard, and this isn't necessarily true at every place, but probably should be, is that if you're going to be on camera for a game, you have to go through extensive PR training. So that was a lot of what the impetus behind getting, I'm like, well, if I'm going to have people on camera, I can only use people who have been PR trained, which is a very small pool of people and is the kind of thing you have to volunteer for, because you're not going to put somebody on camera who doesn't want to be there. So, so I helped kind of coordinate getting people who were interested in doing this kind of training, getting them that training, in some cases walking them through that training, working with my PR manager to help issue that sort of stuff. And then just kind of coordinating the schedules, getting people on, making sure we got questions ahead of time, setting the whole thing up, and then just executing on it. And at the end of the day, I just became the host for him, because it was like, well, you already know everything that's going on, just do the hosting part too. Like, okay, sure, why not? Those were very fun and engaging to do. And then, God, there's so many like little memories that stick out. I think one of the coolest little outreaches I ever did that meant the most to me and clearly meant the most to them was, I think it was BlizzCon 2016. It was either 2016 or 2017. I think it was 2017, because it was a year after Overwatch was announced. And I had been just browsing for cosplayers and people who were active in that realm of the world, because we didn't have a ton of Diablo cosplayers. There were a handful, but we didn't, like, certainly didn't have nearly as much representation during like the costume contest as like WoW might, or certainly later in later years Overwatch might. So I was kind of browsing for that, and I'm like, let's see if I can find some Diablo cosplayers to bring. And I found Stevo, and the pic of her was of her Malthael Reaper crossover costume at like a small Arizona con. And I was like, oh, Arizona. Okay. She's probably not that far away. I wonder if she's ever been to BlizzCon. So I reached out to her and I was just like, hey, do you want a BlizzCon badge? And she just flipped out. She was just like, I've never been to a BlizzCon. I've never been able to get a ticket. I've always wanted to go. This is, are you pranking me right now? Like, is this actually real? I was like, yeah, no, I'll put you on my allotment list. This is cool. So I got her all set up to come, and then she rolls up to that BlizzCon, searched for me all weekend, and I mean, all of you have seen me at BlizzCon. I am a walking corpse for most of the convention, because they're very long days and there's a lot to do on the show floor. So so she finally finds me like tail end of the last day, and she has this gift box for me, this immaculately made gift box, and was just like, I wanted to give this to you because I otherwise wouldn't have gotten to come here, and this is very meaningful to me. And she made me a copy of her mask. So I have a duplicate Malthael Reaper mask. It's actually over here on my desk, but that has there's a special greeting card in it that she made just for me, that was like the embrace of Nevalistis, and it's got special stats written on it and everything, and wrote me a very sweet handwritten note. There's a light in the box so I can turn it on. There's like a glow behind the mask. It's dope as fuck. Like,
That's amazing.
I'm like, and that just blew me away that somebody would do that for me, when, from my perspective, it's like, well, I mean, it's an entry on an Excel sheet, and I have so many of them, and I feel like you deserve one, like, because you do cool things. So, like, for me, it's not much effort, but to the person that it goes to, it means so much, and it's life changing. And you always kind of recognize that after the and then every year after that, every BlizzCon after that, so from 2017, 2018, 2019, she brought me a new gift. Because I don't know if it's because she didn't think she was going to keep getting invited back or what, but I always made sure she had a ticket, because she was awesome. She was passionate. Her costumes were amazing. And she should be there. She should be part of the BlizzCon community. So, so yeah, I think the second year was the Herodric Hamburger, which I think is behind me somewhere. I don't remember what side. Oh, yep, there it
Oh,
is.
there it is.
Over there next. So I got Project Hamburger, and then the other one is in the center. Oh, nope, that side. Okay. I have a black soulstone that glows. And all of these things are one of a kind, right? Like the mask is a duplicate, but like the box it's in is one of a kind. The hamburger is one of a kind. The soulstones, no one has Diablo swag like that, just me. And
Yeah, when you had sent those photos,
I
I saw that soulstone. I was like, that is amazing. Where did that come from?
Yep. That's where it came from. She handmade that for me, and just
Incredible.
I remember tears streaming because that one was the 2019 gift. So that was also my last BlizzCon. Right. Well, I guess it was all of our last BlizzCons, but that's it was
Sad.
Yeah. You
And
need to come
I
back
think
so we can have more of those. Apparently.
right.
I think Leah would be remiss if you didn't also mention the other thing that the Black Soulstone does.
Oh, so the black soulstone also glows.
And is a pin holder.
And is the pen holder. Yeah, that's I can put a pen in that bad boy back there.
She was very adamant about it being a pin holder.
I was very proud of that feature.
I remember because it's like I'm just tangentially connected to the story because I had met her in the press room and she was like, "You have to find me Brandy. I have to get her this gift." And it's like it's a pin holder. It's like.
She was very excited about it. It was delightful. She's just an amazing human being, and she represents the best of the Diablo community. It's someone who's passionate, that this drives them. It's very important to them, and they live it, So those are the people that I always wanted to support, and it was nice to feel appreciated in response.
Coming up in part 2.
When I said I had a surprise, I didn't mean emotional damage, and that wasn't my goal. You were there for a while. I mean, what is things that stand out as failures, or things that you would not want to do again?
Oh, there's two in particular that stand out to me. There was, we'll get to the big one in a second. The show floor was the scariest, and part of that was just because I was alone on the show floor.